In 1796, the richest merchants in Massachusetts came up with a plan to destroy a man they hated. They didn't use courts. They didn't use force. They simply gave him the worst business advice they could invent and waited for him to ruin himself. He followed every word of it, and every single time, it made him richer. The man they tried to bankrupt was named Timothy Dexter, and he could barely read. Let's talk about Timothy Dexter for a second, because almost nothing about his life should have worked. He was born in 1747 to a poor farming family in Massachusetts. He left school at the age of 8. He could write his own name and not a great deal more. As a young man, he worked as a leather dresser, treating animal hides, about as low as honest work got in colonial New England. But here's what almost nobody knows about how he got his start. At 21, with no money and no education, Timothy Dexter married a wealthy widow. And that single decision gave him something he had never had before, a little capital and the freedom to gamble it. And this is where it starts to get strange. After the American Revolution, the new country was broke. Soldiers and citizens had been paid in Continental currency, paper money, and by the end of the war, it had collapsed. It was worth almost nothing. People literally used it to paper the walls of their homes. Timothy Dexter took nearly every dollar he had, and he bought it. Bushels of it. Mountains of worthless paper that everyone else was throwing away. The educated men of his town laughed out loud. They were certain he had finally destroyed himself for good. Then the new federal government made a decision that nobody had seen coming. Alexander Hamilton's treasury agreed to honor that old, dead currency, to redeem it at a fraction of its face value in real, solid money. Overnight, the worthless paper Timothy Dexter had been hoarding by the bushel was worth a fortune. And that should have been the end of the story. It was only the beginning. Now Dexter was rich, and to the old merchant families of Newburyport, Massachusetts, that was unforgivable. A near-illiterate leather dresser, wearing fine clothes, buying a mansion, and, worst of all, beginning to call himself Lord Timothy Dexter. So they set a trap. When Dexter started asking around for advice on where to invest in overseas trade, they fed him deliberately ruinous ideas, the kind of deals that could only lose money. And they kept perfectly straight faces while they did it. The very first thing they told him to do was so pointless, it was already a proverb. They told him to ship coal to Newcastle. Newcastle, in England, was a coal town. It was the coal town, the place that coal came from. Carrying coals to Newcastle was already an English expression that meant doing something utterly, completely useless. Sending coal, there was like selling sand to the desert. Dexter loaded ships with coal, and he sent them straight to Newcastle. And then something happened that not one of those clever merchants could ever have planned for. His ships arrived in the middle of a coal miner strike. The mines had stopped. Newcastle, the city built on coal, had run out of coal. Dexter sold his entire cargo at a premium. He turned a one shipment designed to ruin him into a profit. But that wasn't even the part that broke them. Stunned, the merchants doubled down. This time they told him to ship warming pans to the West Indies. A warming pan was a long-handled metal pan that you filled with hot coals and slid under the blankets to heat a cold bed in winter. The West Indies were tropical islands. No one there had ever needed to warm a bed in their entire life. Dexter sent nearly 40,000 of them. And here is where the story stops making sense by any normal standard. The islands were covered in sugar and molasses plantations. A local buyer looked at these strange, deep metal pans, knocked the lids off, and realized something. They were perfect ladles for skimming boiling molasses, and the long handles kept your hands far away from the heat. They bought every single one. Timothy Dexter profited again. So the merchants tried a third time, and a fourth, and a fifth. They told him to send thick wool mittens to the steaming hot Caribbean. He did. As his ships sat in port, merchants from Asia happened to be buying goods bound for the frozen winters of Siberia. They bought every mitten he had. They told him to ship Bibles to the East Indies. He sent 21,000 of them. Christian missionaries working across the region bought the entire shipment. They told him to round up the stray cats nobody wanted and send them to the Caribbean islands. So he did exactly that. The islands were overrun with rats destroying the crops. Plantation owners paid him good money for every cat he delivered. At this point, every merchant who had tried to ruin Timothy Dexter still believed he understood business, and Dexter did not. Every single one of them was wrong. Dexter took the fortune they kept accidentally handing him, and he built one of the strangest mansions in all of America. He filled the grounds with around 40 enormous painted wooden statues of the great men of history: George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Napoleon, kings, generals, and philosophers. And in the middle of all of them, a statue of himself, with an inscription that named him the greatest philosopher in the Western world. But owning the statues of great men wasn't enough for him. Timothy Dexter decided that a man of his importance needed a personal poet to sing his praises. So he hired one, a former fish seller named Jonathan Plummer, dressed him in a special uniform, and made him his official poet laureate, paid to write verses about the glory of Lord Timothy Dexter. And he didn't stop at Lord. He took the title for himself, with no right to it whatsoever, and insisted the world call him Lord Timothy Dexter, the near-illiterate leather dresser who now lived like nobility on a fortune built from his enemies' worst ideas. And then he did the thing he is most remembered for. Timothy Dexter wanted to know what people truly thought of him while he was still alive to hear it. So he faked his own death. He arranged a complete funeral, and he hid nearby to watch who would come and how hard they would grieve. Around 3,000 people showed up. And when Dexter decided his own wife wasn't weeping hard enough at his fake funeral, he stepped out of hiding and scolded her in front of everyone for it. And here's the detail that still doesn't feel real. Near the end of his life, Dexter wrote a book about his own greatness. He called it A Pickle for the Knowing Ones. It ran about 8,000 words, and it contained no punctuation at all. Not one comma, not one period. Readers complained that it was impossible to read. So for the second edition, Timothy Dexter added one extra page, a page covered in nothing but commas, periods, and question marks, and told his readers they could salt and pepper it as they please. And the book itself was a wild thing. In its pages, Lord Dexter rambled about politics, about his neighbors, about his own greatness, and about every grudge he held. He praised himself. He attacked the clergymen and officials he disliked, and he spelled words however he pleased from one line to the next. He had it printed at his own expense and gave it away for free, and to everyone's astonishment, people actually read it. It went through several editions while he was still alive. The man who left school at 8, who could barely read, wrote a book that is still in print more than 200 years later, and historians have argued about him ever since. Was Timothy Dexter simply a fool that the universe refused to punish? Or was there a strange instinct hidden under the clown? A man who understood that if you make enough wild bets and you can afford to lose them, sooner or later the impossible ones pay off. He bought the dead currency on a hunch. He shipped the warming pans knowing nothing. He may have understood far more than he ever let anyone see. Timothy Dexter died in 1806. One of the wealthiest men in New England. He had built almost his entire fortune out of advice that was specifically designed to destroy him. Every terrible idea his enemies handed him, the world quietly turned into gold. That's real. If this story surprised you, the like button is right there. And if you want more stories that should be fiction but aren't, we post every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Subscribe so you don't miss what's next.